here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome back into the 9 Route, everybody. Pat and Rudy here with you for your Week 5 waiver wire and start sits. We're looking through the roster percentages for the start sits, and there's a couple of guys on here that we've talked about before. There's a couple of new guys that we want to bring up for you as well, and then there's some injury situations that are going to force some guys into some playing time that may be a good pickup for you. So we're going to hit those for you as well. Both of us a little disappointed in the way the Eagles game finished yesterday.
Yeah, man, kind of to be expected a little bit. I mean, the offense looked pretty solid. I mean, they do have the penalties are just ridiculous with that team. I mean, they had a shot to probably win the game just based on the offense because Kansas City's defense was so bad. But yeah, definitely disappointing. Jalen Hurts looks so far so good. I mean, yeah, had a couple bad weeks, had a couple good weeks. Technically, still 8 games into starting quarterback in the NFL. So good to see Devonta Smith, showing up to be the number 1 wideout that he looks like. He had a nice game yesterday. And somebody we'll talk about in a little bit, Kenny Gainwell, really almost kind of taken over the backfield. I mean, they're not running the ball, but as far as catching and, receiving work out of the backfield, it definitely looks like the offense maybe is starting to click a little bit. Yeah, that's tough, though. Plus, you get beat by Andy Reid, so he gets to rub that in your face.
Yeah, Andy just wins in that stadium. This is the way it goes, I guess.
Yeah, crazy.
All right, so let's hop right into the waiver wire here. We have a lot to get to and not much time to get to it. So we're going to breeze through a couple of these guys, like I said, guys that we've already sort of given you stats for and told you to pick up on previous episodes. Guys like Daniel Jones, who's still only about 30% rostered in most leagues. He had a good game in week 4 and is now QB6 on the year, which is actually better than guys like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford up to this point in the season. So if you are still, sitting on guys like, Ryan Tannehill and maybe Matt Ryan, go out and grab a guy like Daniel Jones or Sam Darnold from Carolina, who's about 25% rostered. He's actually QB5 on the year, which is just ahead of Daniel Jones. So, these guys are out there. They're playing well. I know that, they don't have the long-term fantasy production that, you've seen from some of these other guys, but they're showing that they can do it this year and they're putting up fantasy points. So they're worth at least throwing on your roster in 5 weeks, things like that. Injuries are going to happen. So, I mean, as much as they protect the quarterback in the NFL, not many injuries to the quarterback position, but those things always happen. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. You see a lot of guys that are being held on to in front of them. Like, a lot of people have Jameis Winston trying to ride some of the New Orleans offense, so to speak. Baker Mayfield, a lot of people have him as their starter and they think, that again, it's no slight on him, but he just doesn't put up those numbers where he's getting you 30, 35 points a game. I think they said Sam Darnold, some stat came out yesterday. I think he's leading the league in rushing touchdowns, or he's tied for the league lead with 5 of them. So again, yeah, he's a guy. Daniel Jones is another one who's known for being fleet of foot, so to speak. And these guys, they're putting up points. You may not like them. They're not sexy. They're not a rookie quarterback. But if the numbers are there, you just got to bite the bullet, get them on your roster. And if the matchup dictates it, start them.
Yeah, absolutely. So another guy that put up some points yesterday with his legs as well as with his arm was Trey Lance. He came in the second half in relief of Jimmy Garoppolo after Garoppolo had some sort of calf injury that he wasn't really able to play through. And Lance did a really good job. He put up just over 20 fantasy points in your standard, 4-point passing touchdown leagues in just a half of football. So, I have been holding on to Trey Lance in our league of records since I drafted him and have been holding on to him because I kind of had a feeling that at some point he was going to start. And once he did, he was going to be a pretty solid fantasy option. this is the week where, Garoppolo, it looks like he may miss at least a week, maybe a little bit more than that. So this is the week to go out and get Trey Lance, especially if you're struggling at quarterback. He's a guy that if you can't get your hands on a Daniel Jones or a Sam Darnold, you may even want Lance over guys like Jones and Darnold, but he's a guy that can definitely put up fantasy points in both ways, the way that, we just talked about those two guys with the legs and with the arm. So Trey Lance is a huge pickup if he's available in your league, which he probably is, because you don't have fantasy managers rostering a backup quarterback. Like, I normally don't even roster two quarterbacks, but Lance is just one of those guys, I think, who has the type of talent to be sort of like a Jalen Hurts or a Kyler Murray, where he's really athletic and has a chance to put up some really good rushing numbers as well as passing.
No, absolutely. That was the reason they drafted him. Again, Garoppolo is beyond a serviceable. I mean, I wouldn't call him elite, but I'd say at times he can show he's a top 10 quarterback. He just can't stay healthy. I mean, the year that he stayed healthy, put up pretty good numbers, although they walked away from him a little bit in the playoffs. Niners made the Super Bowl. And again, they've had a good defense. Lance walking into a nice situation. Look at the skilled players around him. Deebo Samuel is a monster this year. He's everything they hoped that he could be. Obviously, you got Kittle. Backfield's a little bit murky, but if with Lance back there, I think it opens it up a lot more because Garoppolo isn't that threat to run. Yeah, I think that maybe they made the right call on this North Dakota quarterback, definitely getting him into the fold and, seeing him getting involved as quick as he can. Right now, I think a lot of teams really have to now game plan for the quarterback as opposed to just expecting somebody to maybe manage the game from week to week. So, Trey Lance, pick him up and he's probably going to be startable almost right away, unless you have a better option right now.
Yeah, and he was being used when he wasn't the starter, some of those red zone packages and stuff like that. So I can only imagine that when he does start, you're going to have to pay attention to not only the running back, but also the quarterback keeping the ball when you get close to the goal line. And that's a huge upside, especially if you're in those leagues, like I said, that are 4-point passing touchdown leagues, but 6-point rushing touchdowns. Those extra 2 points every time he runs the ball in is a big advantage.
Another guy, speaking of a little fleet of foot and a young quarterback, he did get a little bit of action last year and looked pretty good. We're looking at Taylor Heineke. Right now in our league, in NFL.com, before Monday night with Derek Carr and Justin Herbert, he looks to be quarterback 13. So he's right there around one of the top guys. He's averaging close to 24 points a game throughout the season. I mean, he had a monster game against the Giants on that Thursday night game. Just lit up Atlanta. Again, not that that's hard, but again, he's doing what needs to be done for almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he put up almost 34 points in our league. And we have 6-point touchdowns, depending on where you're at. Obviously, that number might vary, but he's looked pretty good. Last year, he kind of gave you a little taste of just that youth and something that Washington football team had been lacking was consistent quarterback play. The Dwayne Haskins didn't pan out. They brought in Alex Smith, and obviously he was a little long in the tooth, and then they brought in the KG veteran Ryan Fitzpatrick in the hopes that maybe he would be a bridge to Heineke. But again, he definitely looks solid. Terry McLaurin's starting to flourish a little bit. You see him and that connection happening. So, I think he's a quarterback that you could definitely probably have him on your roster. Look maybe for that bye week, especially when he has a solid matchup. Going to be playing against the Giants again. He's going to be playing against the Eagles, whose secondary and defense has been beat up pretty bad by opposing quarterbacks throughout the season. Again, the only test he may really have is Dallas down the road. But right now, he's definitely somebody should be on your radar, should be in that mold of a guy to keep around for the bye weeks and whatnot. So.
Yeah, he's actually he's the quarterback 13, like you said, but since he took over, because Ryan Fitzpatrick did play most of that first game before he got injured. So just going from weeks 2, 3, and 4, Heineke's actually the QB 7 again without Derek Carr and Justin Herbert. One of those or both of those guys may overtake him, but he's the QB 7 on that in that time total points. So. Again, it's not a sexy offense, like you said, but he's averaging 34 plus pass attempts per game. The Washington defense is not what I think we all expected coming into the season. At least they haven't shown it yet. and they're giving up some points, and it looks like they stay in games. They're throwing the ball, and not only do they have good receiving options now that Curtis Samuel is back off of his injury, but you have two really good pass catching running backs. So there's just a lot of weapons around Heineke, and I think that Washington, I don't necessarily know that they're going to compete for a playoff spot, but fantasy wise, they're a lot of their players are putting good numbers up. So, all right, moving on to running back. First guy we're going to talk about is Damian Williams from the Chicago Bears. He's probably not a guy who's on many rosters in your league. He's only about 6% rostered in most fantasy leagues. But with David Montgomery going down this week to a knee injury, now the initial reports, they think that it looks like he's avoided, a major, ACL tear, like a major knee injury that's going to cost him the season, but they're still not 100% sure what the actual extent of the damage is. So Montgomery could be out a week, 2 weeks. He could be out 6 weeks. It really just, depends on how much time is going to need for him to heal. But in the meantime, Damian Williams is going to be the guy. He should have been the guy last year in Kansas City, but he decided to, for personal reasons, opt out of that season due to some COVID. He had a lot of players do that last year, and Williams was one of them. But he would have been the starting running back for that team instead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and who knows, he may still have played for the Chiefs had he not done that. He may have had a really good year last year. He's a talented back. He's always been good when given the opportunity, and he's going to get a lot of opportunities in this Bears offense that just has really not been able to throw the ball very well. They are a defensive-minded, run-first team, and it was proven by how good David Montgomery has been this year. So I would definitely go out if you're looking for running back help, at least in the short term. Damian Williams is probably the number one target on your waiver wire.
No, absolutely. I know I had him for a week or two and then dumped him because that Bears offense was looking a little shaky. But yeah, seeing the lead dog in that backfield may be a little banged up and may not be 100%. Obviously, their offense in flux with Justin Fields now taking over a quarterback, at least for the meantime. They're trying to make things work out there. It doesn't look good, but if he's going to be able to get the volume and show that he can carry the ball and be a threat out of the backfield, red zone targets and the like, that's probably a no-brainer. He's going to just rank as a top 30, borderline top 25. And if he's a starter and the Bears are going up against, you look at it this way, if they're going up against a bad defense, it's one thing. If they're going up against a good team and they're behind, almost like a Detroit that we talked about before, they're going to get a lot of points in garbage time and stuff like that with underneath dump offs and screens and things of that nature. And those wide receivers in Chicago do command, the coverage. So definitely, I think Damian Williams is a solid pickup right now.
Another solid pickup is Kenny Gainwell from Philadelphia. I know that we did mention him, I want to say, in our week one waiver wire pickups, and then sort of went away from him as far as talking about him for the waiver wire. But once again, he looks to be, maybe not getting the snap share or, the carries and targets that Miles Sanders is getting, but he seems to be doing a lot more with them. And I think that only bodes well for his playing time moving forward. For whatever reason, the Eagles do not seem to want to get Miles Sanders the ball, even though he's one of the best, I believe, one of the best players on that team physically. But Gainwell, every time he touches the ball, he seems like he's really doing something with it. So he's running back 25 on the season in half PPR scoring already. So, he's a guy who, you could potentially already be playing as your RB2. And like I said, moving forward, if he gets more touches and more carries in that offense, I don't see why he isn't a viable start for your team, especially again during, we got the bye weeks coming up starting in week 6, and you're going to need a lot of talent on your roster to sort of navigate your way through that. And Gainwell's a guy who can get you through that bye period with minimal damage to your record.
100%. I watched him on my roster this week in our league sit there and pick up double-digit points of 20 plus. And at the beginning of the year, being a little bit local with an ear and an eye on the birds, there was a strange quote that came out of training camp when they were talking to Miles Sanders, and he said that he's actually learned a lot from Kenny Gainwell. Now, this is, and I think I mentioned it maybe previously because we touched on Miles Sanders in the beginning, and I wasn't high on him coming into the season. But at the same time, for your incumbent starting running back to say that he's learning from a rookie, and I know it's sometimes just talk and things of that nature, but to come out and say that in public is kind of odd. I mean, maybe it's just complimenting him, saying he's doing a good job, but something about that and seeing it's almost a split between the two of them, and the Eagles really haven't been running the football the last couple of weeks. So it's all, receiving work out of the backfield, catch up work again, because they've been behind, especially against Dallas, they were behind. And you just see that he just seems to be more electric in that offense for what he gives you. So Kenny Gainwell to me is the guy. I mean, right now, the big thing being that in red zone, he's almost doubled all the targets and touches in the goal to goes versus Miles Sanders. Yeah, maybe it's just because his coaching staff drafted him. Again, he was highly touted, and he had missed the season with, again, I believe he sat out last year with, making sure COVID didn't get involved in his family and anything like that. Put up some great numbers in college, and now he's starting to transition that to the pros. Another name from I guess you could say a murkier backfield that we're going to talk about too is J.D. McKissic. He was mentioned briefly because there were some injury issues, possibly with Antonio Gibson. He wasn't 100% healthy, but you're starting to see him get way more involved in that offense. I believe it was the Giants game itself where a lot of Gibson owners, I think, Pat, you were one of them, watched McKissic kind of take over, for whatever reason. Again, there may be some issues with injuries and things like that, but to see him kind of start to turn into the player that people thought he was going to be in Seattle, and it never quite worked out. They just had a bunch of the same players out there, and Chris Carson's kind of taken that over. But to see him come out and really be a force to be reckoned with as far as receiving out of the backfield, and that's, again, for PPR leagues, for running backs, that's why they are just gold, because you have to draft running backs, you have to stockpile them. Seeing Gibson, again, not being healthy kind of coming into this week, and he had a shin issue. So it was a little bit of a game time decision. They wanted to see how he was. Sometimes those guys still go out and they do put up decent numbers, but as far as having a guy who's a 1A in an offense like that, where they're being used so heavily, to me, JD McKissic would have to be somebody who's got to get rostered. And again, you might even want to start him in 1 week if it looks like he's going to be the hot hand that they go with in the Washington football team offense. Yeah,
he's already the running back 30 on the season, which, depending on the type of league that you're in, that's a startable play at running back 30. You're talking, in a 12-team league, an RB3. So, he's not going to be Derrick Henry and a guy that you're going to just set and forget every week, but he's definitely a guy, like you said, if the matchup is right, he is somebody who is useful in a lineup. Another guy that seems to be sort of coming around and getting a little bit more work has been Michael Carter for the New York Jets. Carter's probably he's more rostered in leagues than the other guys that we've been talking about at roughly 55%. But he does seem to finally be getting the bigger share of the work in New York. I think that as the season goes on, the Jets obviously got their first win this week over Tennessee. But as the season goes on, I feel like Zach Wilson's going to become more comfortable. Michael Carter's going to become more comfortable. The Jets are a very young team, and getting acclimated to the NFL and learning how to win games is going to be a big sort of step forward for them. And I think that Michael Carter is probably going to be a big part of them learning how to win games. And he's averaging 11 carries and 3 targets in the last 3 games. And he basically is the team's number 1 running back at this point. He's not getting all the carries, obviously, but I think as the season goes on, he's just going to get more and more involved. And I think grabbing him now, if he's available, is a good stash.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, I know him and Javonte Williams were the 2 North Carolina running backs coming out, and a lot of people were higher on Carter, thinking he would just take over. And a lot of people felt that the Jets were going to be, a brand new team, obviously a lot of young players. They felt really strong that they were going to just turn out to be solid, Zach Wilson being one of them. Yeah, you've seen them struggle. They're rookies. It's going to be what it is. They definitely are going to be moving away from all the veteran presence on that team, especially if this this year is just looked at first of maybe a couple years of a rebuild to get a good offense entrenched. You have a new head coach, and everything is lining up that by the end of the season, they're just going to play the kids and make them build a chemistry together and get on the same page. So seeing a player of Michael Carter's ability, again, in an offense that if you're trailing and you're getting crushed, they actually put up a pretty good fight against Tennessee this weekend. You're definitely going to see him start to take over as far as carries and touches and everything. The volume's going to head his way. And, barring an injury, he'll be their RB1 by the end of the year. So get him on your roster, sit on him a little bit. I know they have Ty Johnson and some of the other names that are out there that are rostered, and they'll be involved. But unless this kid just starts fumbling the ball left and right or shows a lack of confidence, he'll be their RB1 by the end.
Another guy you might want to pick up right now is just for a week or two is Samaje Perine from Cincinnati. Joe Mixon, at the end of that game against Jacksonville on Thursday night, sort of rolled his ankle a little bit. They're not calling it a high ankle sprain, which is, the bad ankle sprains, but it's bad enough to where they already have him listed as doubtful for next week, even with a 10-day rest period. So, Perine's not a guy that you're gonna roster and keep on your roster for the rest of the season. But if you're looking for somebody, you've been disappointed at the running back position and you're looking for somebody that might be able to step in and just give you a game to help you win a week, Perine is definitely a guy that you could pick up and, potentially play this week in lieu of Joe Mixon.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% with that. You look at what Joe Mixon has been with all the backfields that are committees or, three-headed monsters, whatever you want to say. Obviously, with Tennessee, everything goes through Derrick Henry. And Cincinnati has really tried to do that with Joe Mixon, and he's done a great job so far this year. And he's always been somebody who can take on a little wear and tear. We've seen him miss time with injuries, getting shut down for the season with the foot injury. So, when you see somebody like that, who is the only game in town really out of the backfield, and they're a heavy passing offense, but to pick up Perine, how do you say
Perine?
Perine. Almost sounds like I'm saying it wrong by saying it right. Just like a Chuba Hubbard. It's actually Chuba Hubbard. I found out Chuba Hubbard, and I feel horrible now. So. Oh no,
it's way funner the way you were saying it.
I know. He's my guy. So Chuba. No disrespect. He Mr. or Mrs. Hubbard. Sorry, you named him great. But yeah, Perine being on that team. I know he was with Washington for a minute, and again, they never really panned out. That was an offense that kind of stunk. But yeah, seeing him there, and another name to keep an eye on too is Chris Evans, who was drafted out of Michigan. He's getting a little bit of work. A couple passes out of the backfield. He's 3 catches on 3 targets for 40 yards. So he's averaging about 13 yards of reception. Yeah, if Mixon's murky and he's out of the loop for a couple of weeks to rest the ankle, and hopefully nothing else is wrong, structural or otherwise. If Perine's in there, and Evans, they may try to go with a hot hand if one of them struggles. Obviously, Perine is the number 2 because he's the veteran presence, probably knows the playbook a little better, things like that, because he was with them last year. But then to see Evans there as well, lurking in the background. If you're a Mixon owner, you might want to go that deep. But Perine right now definitely is going to be the RB1 in Cincinnati and a pretty high-flying offense. So you might want to get him on your roster.
And you had one guy that you wanted to mention as well before we move on to the wide receivers.
I talked about him briefly last week, and I have a soft spot for the guy. Again, I don't know what it is. I look at it probably for the reason that we're looking at Perine being the guy with filling in for Joe Mixon, but to see Jeremy McNichols once again getting a little bit more involved in the offense with the Tennessee Titans. To me, he's an injury away from being a guy who just turns out to be, something special possibly, and get volume in a crazy way. Obviously, that's the only way he's going to be the guy to step up and get it. But right now, when you look at him and what he did, like over the weekend, he scored 16.5 points. And that was a crazy game against the Jets. And again, it just happens to be that he's never going to be the number 1 guy. But he's already got a receiving touchdown. He's put up some pretty decent numbers so far in a backup role. He's a guy to me that just through the season, if he's starting to get a little bit more usage and he's a little bit of a passing, receiving threat out of the backfield, wouldn't hurt to have him, especially if you're a Henry owner, just to maybe have him on your roster and see what he's able to do. Again, he's already getting red zone work. He's already been targeted there. He's already scored a touchdown. It wouldn't hurt to maybe get Jeremy McNichols as your insurance policy, maybe, but he's got borderline flex appeal in some of your bye weeks, I think, based on the matchup.
All right, moving on to wide receivers. Again, we have a few guys that we talked about before, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. But there are a few new guys that we want to mention as well. AJ Green still only 21% rostered. That's kind of, I get it. You know, he's kind of not been the AJ Green of old for a while, but he's on a new offense. He's healthy. The Cardinals are scoring a ton of points. I think if AJ Green is available in your league, you need to grab him and throw him on your bench. I mean, you don't have to necessarily start the guy, although I do believe he is startable some weeks. Another guy that we had already sort of mentioned in previous episodes was Tim Patrick from the Denver Broncos. I know that he didn't really have a great game this week against Baltimore, but Baltimore's a pretty tough defense. And, with Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler being out, he's going to see passes. He's going to see targets. Teddy Bridgewater, hopefully he'll be back from his concussion next week, and we won't have to sit through the Drew Lock-led Denver Broncos. But
they don't want to see him either.
No, I trust. Good Lord. But if Bridgewater's back out there, he's an extremely accurate quarterback. He throws the ball to Tim Patrick, so go ahead and grab him. And again, just throw him on your bench. No need to necessarily start him. But again, we're talking about bye weeks coming up, and you're going to want to have a lot of wide receivers and running backs on your roster for those bye weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're looking at guys that are wide receiver ones or twos, and again, if Bridgewater comes back, Tim Patrick has that ability. We did talk about that for a couple of weeks now, so he's definitely a guy.
So a couple of guys that we're going to mention real quick. These are not guys that, you should be rushing out to grab, but there's just some names to keep in mind as far as potential waiver wire pickups in the future. But again, sometimes you get on these guys early enough, you don't have to waste a lot of fab or burn your waiver priority on certain guys. So Kadarius Toney had a pretty good game this week for the Giants. He's not a guy who really was getting a whole lot of targets up until this week, but with Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton being injured, the Giants obviously needed Kadarius Toney. They targeted Kenny Golladay a lot more than they had as well. So depending on the injury status of Shepard and Slayton, Toney's a guy that you can pick up again just as a spot start if necessary. He's an athletic guy. He may not be the focal point of that offense, but you can go ahead and grab him and hold him until Shepard and Slayton get back.
No, I think you're 100% on that. He was a first round pick out of Florida. A lot of people kind of laughed at it. They didn't think he had the skill set to play right away, and he's maybe getting pressed into service. But Saquon had a nice game. I mean, it's kind of scary to think that maybe they are, kind of panning out offensively in New York. And it looks like that Toney could be a big piece to that puzzle with playing out of the slot, being a guy maybe for some gimmick and trick plays and jet sweeps and things like that. Again, he's got the athleticism, and Florida's no slouch with turning out pros. So again, yeah, definitely want to maybe keep Kadarius Toney on your radar. And if you're an owner of like a Golladay or a Sterling Shepard, it wouldn't hurt. Again, it's almost like a running back's handcuff. Sometimes you want to have that guy who's going to be next man up in an offense that isn't too bad. Whether they're playing from behind and giving you garbage time points or just being competitive. Definitely a good name, Kadarius Toney. Another guy sticking in New York that has come back after injury from the beginning of the season and strong veteran presence, always known to be a PPR darling from his days in Washington, and that has transitioned to the New York Jets. Jamison Crowder, again, a lot of you that are out there in the community know that name. And again, you hold him in high regard. He's never going to be a top 5 wide receiver, but when it comes to PPR specifically, this guy makes your day, especially as a flex or a wide receiver too, based on volume. I mean, there's really nothing about it. For his first game back, targeted 9 times, 7 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown. He's obviously right back to where he is. And you saw that offense kind of gel a little bit through the game. Corey Davis had a big game. We just talked about Michael Carter getting involved. So you're starting to see a little bit of a turn offensively for the Jets as a whole. Maybe it was getting him back as a piece. We talked about Braxton Berrios for a couple of weeks, just getting volume underneath. And obviously he's going to fade now that Jamison Crowder's back, because that's his role, is to just be the guy that just goes out and you need a first down, you need a big play, you need to make the chains move. He's going to be your guy. So yeah, definitely. I think Jamison Crowder, if he's out there, get him right now, because he's probably going to be a top 25, maybe by the end of the season, just based on that volume in PPR.
Yeah, another guy who is a potential pickup now before it becomes too late. Again, this is really, really speculative at this point, but Josh Gordon just re-signed. He was cleared to return back to the NFL, and he signed to the Kansas City Chiefs practice squad.
I'll drink to that.
He may not be the Josh Gordon, that we remember from Cleveland, but there's no doubt that the guy is talented. Again, he may sit on your bench and not ever crack your starting lineup, but if he does become something, anything close, AJ Green, we were just talking about him and how, he's not the AJ Green of old, but he's giving you enough production to start. Josh Gordon could do the same thing, later on in the season. It's just a matter of, how quickly he gets acclimated to the offense and, how useful he can be.
No, absolutely. I know it is a shame to see somebody that talented that has gone through so many hard times in his personal life to get over the hump in the NFL. Yeah, what he did in Cleveland those first few years, people thought he was going to be like the next Randy Moss, and then just to see it kind of slip away. He's tried to make some comebacks. It hasn't quite worked out for him. Maybe this is where he gets right and realizes, that he does have something left in the tank in a dynamic offense. You got Pat Mahomes there. He could be a big piece to the puzzle if he gets acclimated to the playbook and just contributes. He didn't look too bad with Seattle. Again, that's just a different offense altogether. But to see him get in there and maybe be able to contribute and really be on a winning team, I think maybe playing in Cleveland probably takes a lot out of you. But being in Kansas City with Andy Reid and that coaching staff and everybody, I think that's a pretty good way to go for him. So hopefully things look up. And Josh Gordon, yeah, maybe if you have some depth at the end of your bench, stick him on there. Wouldn't hurt to have a piece of Kansas City's offense, would it? And finally, a quick name that was a training camp guy but went down. He had to get core muscle surgery, and he's just making his way back to the Baltimore Ravens roster, is Rashad Bateman, who was their first round pick. And he was expected to be, a big contributor, looked pretty good in camp, and then went down with the injury. He's going to come into an offense that just, we all know it goes through the running game. It goes through the quarterback. Just like this week, you saw Lamar Jackson throw for 316, and he wasn't feeling quite himself. They didn't send him out to do his normal rushing attack. They kind of protected him and had him throw the ball. And he was able to pick them apart. Maybe they just weren't expecting it. Hollywood Brown had a nice game. He spread the ball around very well throughout. Only had the one receiving touchdown, but again, with the way that offense goes, they just move the ball one way or the other, try to hope their defense keeps them in the game as much as they do. And they've done that for a very long time. At the end of the day, to get Rashad Bateman in there, and as long as he's healthy, it'll take him a few weeks to get caught up to game speed and, being on the field, being active, getting out there, running routes and getting a connection maybe with Lamar Jackson that he had in training camp. If you have the ability to get a number one pick, a young rookie wide receiver on your roster, make sure you have him. Rashad Bateman isn't a bad guy to take a look at right now. Again, he may not contribute right away, but by the end of the season, I think they're going to really want to see what they have. So he'll start to make his bones out there for the Ravens.
All right, moving on to the tight end position. First guy we're going to talk about is Dalton Schultz from the Dallas Cowboys. In the last 2 weeks, since Schultz really kind of, started to come on, he's got 15 targets, which is the same amount as Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb combined in those last 2 games. He's got 12 catches of those 15 targets for 138 yards and 3 touchdowns. And, this isn't, I'm not trying to predict that Dalton Schultz is going to be, up in the, George Kittle and Darren Waller range, but Dallas is a very high powered offense, and teams are going to want to take away Cooper. They're going to want to take away CeeDee Lamb. They're going to, try to stop the run and Zeke and Tony Pollard. I mean, Dallas just has so many weapons that you can't stop everybody. And I don't think that Schultz is going to continue on this kind of pace, but he's a guy that if you're struggling at tight end, throw him on your roster, throw him in your lineup. And if teams are trying to take those other options away, Dalton Schultz has proved that he can absolutely deliver if given the opportunity.
Yeah. Like you said, there's so many moving parts, and it's very hard for a coaching staff and a defense to figure out who to stop with Dallas. And Gallup's still been hurt, so they really haven't been to everybody. But to see Dalton Schultz in our league, he's out on waivers, and I think people just don't see it, or maybe they feel like they're locked in with their tight end pick. In our league right now, before Monday night with Darren Waller playing, he's tight end 3. Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous. And Dallas has always been, Jera runs that organization well, but you go back and you look, you had Jay Novacek, you had Jason Witten, you've had those big names. They like the tight end position because it keeps the defense honest. Now having all the weapons that you have, and again, he's a blocking tight end, sure, but he can obviously get out there and make some plays. And you're starting to see that with, again, the tight end position just becoming so dynamic, and these guys are coming out of college left and right because of the established. Like you had your Gonzalez and your Gronks back in the day, and now to see, you have Kittle, you have Travis Kelce, you have Darren Waller, Hawkinson in Detroit, and Schultz looks like he has the potential, just based on the volume in that offense, to finish as a top 10, possibly a top 5 tight end in our league. Another name from another high-powered offense who may be an afterthought, or people feel that he's just touchdown dependent. I don't care if you're touchdown dependent or not. If you're, and again, if you're a top 5 tight end, you're making plays, you're doing everything you can to help somebody like me this week, help me win my league. Dawson Knox in Buffalo. Right now, he in our league, again, this is pre-Monday night, this is pre-Darren Waller. He's top 5 tight end. He's tight end 5. He's already got 4 touchdowns, and everybody knows how explosive the Buffalo offense is. They just obliterated the Houston Texans 40-0. To see him just be such a focal point in the red zone. He had been, for the last year or two, they had been kind of trying to get that tight end situation figured out. There were words that they might try to get Zach Ertz from Philadelphia because there was a surplus here, but they never made that move. And he's healthy, and he seems to be very much a big part of Josh Allen's playbook, finding him in the red zone, all the things you want to see from a tight end. And he is making catches, obviously PPR and the like. But even if you take some of that out of the equation, the 4 touchdowns are also there. And I know some people get worried, if he has a game where he's held out of the end zone, but he's averaging a touchdown a week. So at the end of the day, they spread that ball around. Their defenses that go against Buffalo have to be honest. Dawson Knox just seems to be the recipient of everything that you'd want for your tight end. He's getting the volume, he's getting the targets, he's getting the touches, he's in the red zone, he's doing everything he needs to do. He's actually, one of the tops when it comes to that. So, yeah, Dawson Knox, if he hasn't been picked up in your league, even if you have one of the top dogs at tight end, he's a borderline option to have a tight end and a flex to put in that position, which, again, that's a beauty if you're able to have 2 top 5s at that position, because you really take away from a lot of the other teams in your own league that maybe be scrambling or stream tight end.
Another guy who had a pretty decent week and last week, not as great this week, but Tyler Conklin from the Minnesota Vikings. He's not a name that everybody knows, or a guy that you were probably drafting highly in your drafts. But a lot of people in the fantasy industry and fantasy community thought that Irv Smith was going to have a good season. They kind of saw the writing on the wall with Minnesota, and Conklin has kind of just stepped in and took over that situation and done well with it. So he's really taken advantage of the targets that he's receiving. He saw 3 red zone targets last week and is currently ranked tight end 13 on the season. Again, he's not a guy that you're going to, maybe start every single week, but he's a guy where, if Minnesota is going to get into these shootout games, which it seems like, is going to happen for them in most weeks because their defense has sort of struggled. Conklin could be on that Dawson Knox level where he's going to see those red zone targets. He's a big guy, and Kirk Cousins is definitely looking for him in and around the end zone.
Yeah, Tyler Conklin obviously is starting to make some waves, and he is part of that offense. So obviously, if he's going to get the targets and the receptions, and again, if he starts getting some decent red zone work and picking up some scores that way, I think you could definitely look to have him as definitely a stream option no matter what. But wouldn't hurt to have him as your backup because again, the bye weeks are coming.
All right, moving on to our start sits for the week. All right, so let's start at quarterback. I'll let you take the lead on this one. Who do you got for your quarterback?
All righty. Thank you, sir. We did talk previously in this episode, just a few minutes back, talking about picking this guy up off the waiver wire. And again, he's a solid option. Right now in our league, he is the 8th ranked quarterback, Sam Darnold. He's going to go against the Philadelphia Eagles this week. And the Eagles defense has really looked suspect. Obviously, when you go against Kansas City, you're always going to look suspect. But they've been lit up pretty hard this year. The only game where they really didn't struggle, say the Atlanta game, once they really kind of sunk their teeth into that offense that was struggling. San Francisco, they did play decent, but by the second half, they kind of folded and really kind of gave the game away. A lot has been made of their defense over the last couple of years with Jim Schwartz being a bend but don't break, give up yardage, give up a lot of prevent concepts where, again, if your team's going against them in the fantasy world, yeah, it's going to just give you points. The Eagles team struggling right now. They have a new defensive coordinator. They have a lot of new people all across the defense. They just don't look healthy enough and strong enough right now to stop anybody. And to see what Sam Darnold and that Carolina offense is doing week after week. They're not a joke. This team is really great. There's talk that McCaffrey could play this week. They'll see how he is, but I think they might even hold him back. But they didn't look horrible against Dallas. Dallas just outscored them, when it all comes down to it. Sam Darnold against Philadelphia this week. If he's not on your team, pick him up. And if he's not your starter because you have a better option, that's one thing. But I think you need to get him on your roster, get him starting against the Eagles. If you're streaming, you're probably drooling over this matchup. So Sam Darnold against the Eagles this week is my start at quarterback.
I'm going to go with Joe Burrow this week versus Green Bay. Green Bay's 14th worst defense against quarterbacks fantasy-wise. The over-under in that game is 49.5 points, which is a decent over-under. We talked a little bit earlier about Joe Mixon potentially missing this game. And, Cincinnati, they've been more balanced this year than they have been. But I feel like in this game against Green Bay, Cincinnati's defense hasn't been great. And Green Bay's offense is starting to come around and score some points. So I feel like this is going to be one of those games where Cincinnati's going to have to throw the ball to sort of keep up with Green Bay. And I think Burrow with T. Higgins hopefully coming back, his connection that you've already seen with Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd, he's definitely a good option. I think he's going to have to throw the ball 40 plus times this week, which is, the more opportunities, the more fantasy points. So I think you can start Joe Burrow pretty confidently this week to get you 20 plus points and, your 4-point passing touchdown leagues. All right, moving on to the quarterback sits. Who do you not like this week?
I hate to say it. I mean, I know we talked about these rookie quarterbacks, and you're hoping this kid does turn out to be something. Right now, with the way the Chicago Bears offense is playing, they're pretty tough to kind of get behind. I mean, again, if they have a good matchup, that's one thing. But I want to sit Justin Fields this week going against the Las Vegas Raiders. Yes, the Raiders are going to be coming off of a short week, getting ready to play this Monday night. But they've already had 7 sacks on the quarterback through 3 weeks. They'll probably add to that total again tonight. Again, it's just a matter of that team kind of blowing them out, maybe playing a little more conservative, I think. Again, they're going to be on a shorter week. I think they're going to just try to manage the game. Again, this kid just seems like it's not his fault, but I think he's struggling.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a rookie quarterback this week as well. Looks like Trey Lance is going to get his first start. And it's funny, we just talked about how well he did in one half of football, fantasy points wise. But this week against Arizona, I'm a little bit worried because Arizona's a top 10 defense versus quarterbacks fantasy point wise. And they just held Matthew Stafford to under 20 points, which that hasn't happened. It was the first time that happened all season. Arizona's defense they're getting after the quarterback. They're playing extremely well. Their offense is scoring points, which means that the other team generally has to throw the ball. And I think with Trey Lance being a rookie, and, I just feel like this is going to be a really big stage for him. And it doesn't make me feel very confident in starting him. I do like picking him up. I do like holding him on your bench, but I think I'd rather see a decent game out of him before I'd be willing to start him, especially against a good defense like Arizona.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these kids are going to have growing pains no matter who they are.
All right, let's move to running backs. Who are you starting at running back this week?
My running back start is going to be somebody who is he's turning into a fantasy darling. It only took him about a decade to do it. Right now in our league, pre-Monday night, Cordarrelle Patterson is the running back number 2 in points scored in the NFL.com league, and probably pretty close to it in a lot of the other leagues. Nobody ever saw this one coming. And if you say that you did, again, you're probably talking about 6 years ago. He's been hyped for years. He's just getting so much volume as far as when he's in there. Now, he's not in there for a lot of plays. I know people are suspect on that. They think, well, they don't have him on the field all the time. But when he's out there, I mean, the man is just doing everything for that offense. He's made Mike Davis almost an afterthought. He just had an explosive game. I mean, he scored 3 touchdowns right there. That's just 18 points, even if he ran it in from the 1. But yeah, he had 6 carries for 34 yards, but he caught 5 receptions on 6 targets, 82 yards, 3 touchdowns. Right now, Cordarrelle Patterson is the Atlanta Falcons offense. Now, eventually they may do something to try to stop that. But when you're going up against the New York Jets, who can't stop anything, especially coming out of the running back position, to see somebody this dynamic coming in, yeah, game might be a little bit ugly one way or the other. But to me, Cordarrelle Patterson's probably going to feast and get about good 25 points and be involved. To me, he is the start of the week at running back against the New York Jets.
Yeah, he has been killing it recently. I'm going to go with Darrell Henderson for the Los Angeles Rams. They get Seattle this week, and Seattle's actually the 3rd worst defense versus running backs in fantasy. The over-under for that game is 53.5, which means that, Vegas is sort of seeing that as a shootout. And Henderson's been catching passes out of the backfield. He's getting most of the carries when he's healthy. Obviously he missed last week with that injury, but he's averaging 16.5 fantasy points per game. And he's just a solid start when he is playing. And I think in a game against Seattle, where there's definitely going to be some points on the board, he's got as good a shot as any of getting in the end zone. So I'm going to go ahead and start Darrell Henderson this week. All right, for your sit, who are you looking at there?
Some people are going to argue and say that I'm wrong, and I'm not wrong. I'm just not always right. But looking at the matchup coming up this week for this kid, I want to, unless you have nobody else that you can put in there, I feel like you're going to have a quiet week out of Najee Harris. The Pittsburgh offense has really struggled as a whole, but that's because of the quarterback and the wide receiver injuries and the offensive line being horrible. This kid really has played well in spite of all that. He's doing it, he's doing it rushing. He's doing it receiving. He's just like a one-man band on that team. But going up against the Denver Broncos this week, now, granted, that team's got some maybe question marks around their quarterback, see how the offense does if they have to go with, somebody as far as Drew Lock to kind of carry them. But I just see Pittsburgh struggling in this game, to see this defense coming in here and really that offensive line is going to be just so involved in just protection. And I just don't see him doing it. I think Harris is going to have a lot of trouble. He's probably going to be used a lot in pass protection, especially, as a little bit of a decoy, because right now every coach is looking at this, every D coordinator, and saying, well, if we stop Harris, we stop him. So they're just going to key on him. They're going to have 7-8 in the box, things of that nature, because nobody's scared of Ben Roethlisberger's arm. Again, the wide receivers are banged up. And as long as you get some pressure in there, he's seeing ghost. But to me, Najee Harris this week, I'm not going to say he's not going to be a top 20, but I just don't see him putting up the overall points that have pushed him to the point where right now he's, again, in NFL.com. In our league, he's RB3 going into the Monday night game. So if you have no other options, obviously he's going to be your guy. I wouldn't expect him to maybe be as dominant as he's been the last couple of weeks, but I would sit Najee Harris if you have options against Green Bay.
Yeah, you probably don't have better options than Harris, but I can definitely see a very low scoring game in that Denver-Pittsburgh game. And Obviously low scoring usually means low fantasy points. So I definitely feel you on that one. I'm going to go, this might be maybe a gimme, but there's still a lot of teams starting Myles Gaskin from the Miami Dolphins. They play Tampa Bay this week, and Tampa has just completely shut down every running back that they've played so far this year. They're also scoring points on offense, aside from last night's game where New England played them pretty tough. But in games where Tampa Bay gets out and scores points, and then their interior defensive linemen are just so big and so strong and so good at stopping the run, Miami's going to have to throw the ball. Now, Gaskin is a decent pass catcher out of the backfield, so he may, grab a few receptions in that game and a few yards, but I wouldn't have the confidence to start him if he was on my fantasy team. And I think that there's definitely some better options out there. If Myles Gaskin is one of those guys that you're considering for your RB2 or your flex. All right. For your wide receiver start, where are you going there?
I mean, again, looking around the league, looking at some matchups, obviously this guy is pretty much tops in most people's leagues. And again, it's coming off a monster game against the Atlanta Falcons. I think you have no choice but to start Terry McLaurin against the New Orleans Saints. I know some people think, Washington, you never know, but we just sung the praises of Taylor Heineke earlier. We talked about how McKissick and Gibson obviously are a 1 and a 1A. It looks like they're starting to get some pieces moving around in that offense. And Terry McLaurin's been pretty solid for every point in his career. And I think you're really starting to see him just move into that true alpha wide receiver one territory. Right now, again, in our league, he's top 5. This is pre-Monday night. This is pre-Mike Williams, who's also having a great season. To me, Terry McLaurin is going to be that guy for that offense. Logan Thomas, who had been a focal point, is nursing a week-to-week hamstring injury. They don't really seem to go to too many other options. Like we talked about, you have McKissick, you have Gibson, but he's a true wide receiver one. And it's great to see him really break out and help to make that offense dynamic. Heineke and him have a pretty great rapport right now. And again, they're quietly building something down there where they had been all defense for years and no offense. You're really starting to see them come around, and Terry McLaurin's a big piece of it, going against New Orleans, who right now is the 24th best or worst, however you want to look at it, against wide receivers. So, yeah, the big game against Atlanta, I think, was a little bit of a coming out party. I think he's probably going to finish as top 5 wide receiver for the year.
And I'm going to go with Marvin Jones from Jacksonville. I know that he had a pretty pedestrian week in week 4 against Cincinnati, but DJ Chark went out early in that game, and it looks like he's going to be out for a while, possibly for the rest of the season.
Yeah, broken ankle, right?
Yes. And Tennessee has just been terrible against wide receivers. I mean, Zach Wilson
this week.
Yeah, exactly. Crowder had a good game. Corey Davis had a really good game. They just have not been able to stop anybody. Tennessee's defense is literally last at giving up points to wide receivers fantasy wise. And I think Jones and Chenault both are going to, obviously get a lot of play with Chark being out. And I just don't see a scenario really where, because Jacksonville's defense isn't great either. And Tennessee's probably going to score, especially if Julio and or AJ Brown can make it back into the lineup. So I can see that sort of being a game where neither team can stop the other. And I like the wide receivers. I like all the wide receivers and on both sides, but I'm going to pick Jones as my start because he kind of had a bad week, and I think he's going to bounce back and have a really good one this week. So,
yeah, he's going to have a better week in Jacksonville than the coach. That's for sure.
All right. And who are we sitting at wide receiver? Who are you sitting?
I'm going to sit Brandon Cooks. Been pretty solid all season long. Obviously, he's one of the top wide receivers in the league based on points in fantasy. Based on his volume, basically being one of the only games in town consistently for the Houston Texans. And right now he's a top 10 wide receiver in our NFL.com league. Yeah, you're going against the New England Patriots. They're pissed off coming off a tough loss coming off of Sunday Night Football. You have Bill Belichick, who we spoke about before. I know I mentioned that, he can make or break a quarterback. Well, especially against young rookie quarterbacks, he's always known to be that guy. You're going against Davis Mills, who has just been there. I mean, obviously that whole situation in Houston is just crazy right now. We're a top 5 quarterbacks on the bench based off of field issues, and that's going to be worked out eventually, some way, somehow. Davis Mills starting, throwing to Brandon Cooks. I just see it's just not going to happen this week. He's going to be taken out of the game. The quarterback is. They're coming off a shutout loss to the Buffalo Bills, so they didn't even put up a point. You're looking at the top 5 defense against a wide receiver, and you're looking at that quarterback trying to get the ball off against New England. They're just going to sink their teeth in. And Brandon Cooks, he's going to have a bad week this week. So again, you have options. He better be sitting on the bench, maybe a flex play tops. But yeah, I don't see Brandon Cooks putting up the numbers he's done so far against that New England defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill Belichick is, like you said in one of the previous podcasts, is really good at taking away a team's number one option. And Brandon Cooks is not just the number one option, but he seems like the only option. And he's probably going to be shadowed by Stephon Gilmore, which, again,
see you later.
Yeah. I mean, he just does not give up fantasy points. I'm going to sit Juju Smith-Schuster. We talked a little bit about that Denver-Pittsburgh game earlier. I don't see a lot of points in that game. And Juju is actually 4th on the team right now as far as target percentage, which I was a little surprised at. When Deontay Johnson is there and healthy, and he's obviously, the target eater. Roethlisberger doesn't really throw the ball down the field very far. So
because he can't. It's a shame. It's bad.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't get time to, even if he could. That offensive line is so bad. Again, with the other options there, Claypool should probably be back this week. Johnson obviously takes the targets. Najee Harris, had that huge 19 target game. I could see him possibly getting some targets out of the backfield as well. They just throw the ball short, and that's really not Juju's game. So I don't like him this week at all. And I Denver has really been stout against wide receivers. They're the second best team versus the wide receiver in fantasy. And this game actually has the lowest over under on the week at 40.5 points. So even Vegas doesn't expect a lot of scoring in this game. So I would sit most of my Steelers and Broncos this week, but definitely sit Juju this week. All right, moving on to tight end.
Tight ends, always my favorite position. And coming off watching even the Sunday night game, you're starting to see a pretty good rapport starting to come through. Mac Jones is looking like a pretty capable quarterback in this league through, the first couple of weeks. Again, it's early. Obviously, he's got a great coach there. And they signed a lot of people in the offseason to put around him at the tight end position, whether it was going to be him or Cam Newton. Turns out it's Mac Jones throwing to Jonnu Smith was an option. He's a little banged up right now. But Hunter Henry, who had his issues with injuries before with the Chargers, but he signed a big free agent deal and looks pretty good so far. He's starting to get more and more involved through the weeks. He had a touchdown last night, which was big to get him into double-digit points. He's slowly making his way up the tight end charts on our league as far as things go, because, again, it was a little bit of a dual threat, and Jonnu Smith was the bigger option, but he has pulled ahead. This week, he's got a pretty solid matchup, as we did mention, against those Houston Texans, who can't stop anything. They're 31st against the tight end position. Again, you got that team going down there that's just going to pick you apart. They look for the best options and any weak point that you have. So knowing that that's the spot for you right now that you could just hammer on, I definitely see Hunter Henry having a pretty solid week, probably hitting double-digit points. He'll be a top 10 tight end this week for you. So if you're streaming or if you're just looking for an option because your guy's in a bad matchup, I think to get Hunter Henry in there is going to be a solid start for tight end this week against Houston. As for yours, who are you looking at, Pat?
So this is the second time I'm going to the same well here. I guess I'm one of those people who likes to stick with what works, I guess. I'm going to go with Mike Gesicki again this week. There's certain teams that I said before, I target Dallas a lot. I target Tampa Bay a lot because the way that these games go, they're very sort of predictable. And against Tampa Bay, you have to throw the ball. Last week, the Sunday night game against Tampa, Hunter Henry, who you just talked about, had a touchdown. Jonnu Smith also had a touchdown. The way to, I say, beat the Bucs, but keep in games against the Bucs is to throw the ball. And it's why Myles Gaskin was my sit. It's also why Mike Gesicki is my start. They're third worst against the tight end. And again, with that big over under, I just don't see how Miami can stay in this game if they're not throwing the ball, and Gesicki is getting targets from Jacoby Brissett. So it 2-2 in my book just, sort of makes sense. So, all right. So who do we not like at tight end?
Well, I do not like Jared Cook this week. He's going to be coming on a short week, going up against a great defense. They're actually number 9 against the tight end, the Cleveland Browns. Again, we haven't seen Monday night shake out yet. So, you don't really know 100% what's going to happen going week to week. But to me, he's been very serviceable. He's obviously in a very high flying offense that we keep talking about, those types of games. He really hasn't put up great numbers just yet because, he's still getting used to it. It's his first year with that team. But as a whole right now, probably after this week, you're going to see him as a top 10 tight end based off of stats. He is getting usage. He is getting receptions as much as possible. But Justin Herbert is probably going to look to him here and there, but you're going to have a tough time getting him involved when you need to protect the quarterback or run block as much as they're going to have to do. And you saw how they just shut down, the Cleveland Browns just shut down Minnesota pretty hard. And their tight end, who was pretty decent, we talked about Tyler Conklin, just being a non-factor. I think Cook's going to get involved a lot more blocking. He's not probably going to be able to make his way out as much as he'd like to get anything. Maybe get the touchdown near the goal line. That'd be great if he gets you 6-7 points. But I would sit Jared Cook. It's going to be a tough matchup against Cleveland.
Yeah, and I just talked about Juju being the 4th option. I mean, Jared Cook is easily the 4th option on that team too. So it's one of those things where could he, be the guy? Possibly, but I'd say probably not. And I'm going to sit Kyle Pitts this week. I know they're going against the Jets, and people see that as a good matchup, but Atlanta, their offense has been mostly through their running backs. You just, said earlier that you are starting Cordell Patterson this week. I think Mike Davis gets back into, that top, 20 or so. I just don't see Atlanta throwing the ball a ton. Kyle Pitts he's been involved. He's getting the targets, but they're not converting. And that may be the rookie thing, him, still learning, some of the nuances of the NFL, but the Jets are a top 12 team against the tight end. The over under in that game is fairly low at 44 points. And they're not giving up a ton of points to tight ends. They're only giving up about 5.5 points per game to the tight end position. Kyle Pitts has yet to score in the NFL. So, it's just one of those things where all the numbers sort of point in the direction to say sit Pitts this week. So I'm going to sit Kyle Pitts.
Smart move.
All right. And last, let's go to the defense. Who do you like to start this week?
Well, I've been riding them throughout this podcast episode, and I'm going to ride them all the way to the bank this week. Patriots defense against Houston. To me, it's a no-brainer. It's Belichick going against a rookie quarterback with a pretty solid defense. Again, we watched them shut down, if you want to consider it a shutdown, but shut down a high-flying Tampa Bay offense with a quarterback that they were quite familiar with. I think that played into it a little bit. It was a different game altogether. But to me, it's just a no-brainer on this level that you have to. I mean, again, you're talking about a team that just got shut out 40-0 from the Buffalo Bills, who are right now the alpha in the AFC East. And to see another AFC East team coming in with the pedigree of the Patriots, it's all over for that team. Maybe they score compared to last week, but it's not going to be a lot. They probably won't even get double-digit points. Davis Mills will be on the run. He'll be struggling. Patriots defense could get you 20 points this week. Start them with confidence against the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to another game that we had already talked about and start the Denver Broncos against Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh bottom 12 team versus defenses. They've only scored 67 points so far this season in 4 games, which is, bottom 10 in the league. Big Ben, we talked about it again earlier. He just looks like he's not a capable quarterback at this point in his career, unfortunately. He's only got 3 passing touchdowns on the year to go with 3 interceptions. So as a defense, if you're just as likely to give up a touchdown pass as you are to get an interception, I'll take that for my defense any day of the week. So start the Denver Broncos this week against Pittsburgh. All right. And for your sit?
I'm going to sit the Philadelphia Eagles defense against the Carolina Panthers. Talked about it when I talked about my quarterback start. I see the Carolina offense being borderline high octane at times. The quarterback is having almost an MVP season. And to see them get picked apart week after week, again, Kansas City just punched them in the mouth pretty hard. Dallas embarrassed them on Monday night, and they just look to be in disarray on the defensive side of the ball in real NFL terms, which usually translates to a tough week for that defense. They really haven't got a lot of pressure and things of that nature. I know they did get a fumble recovered strip sack touchdown against Dallas, which, it always helps. You get some of those big plays like that. But I can't see you going with this team. They're going to give up a ton of points again. You're going to see this offense from Carolina, I think, just pick them apart. Maybe McCaffrey makes it back. I know there's whispers that he could be, the week to week. We'll see how he feels. But McCaffrey or no McCaffrey, the Eagles defense, put him on the bench. They're going to have another tough week against a very good Carolina offense. And who are you sitting this week, Pat?
So speaking of the Eagles getting smoked by the Chiefs, I think the Chiefs are going to put up some points again this week coming up against Buffalo. That game's got a 56.5 point over under, which is the highest of the week, which again means that Vegas expects a lot of scoring in that game. And I sort of expect a lot of scoring in that game. Buffalo has been a top 5 defense this year, fantasy wise, as far as scoring you points, but I don't see that trend continuing this week against Kansas City, because Kansas City is actually the second best team scoring against defenses. So I just think it's going to be too much of a shootout. There may be a turnover here, a turnover there by either side, but I don't think there's going to be enough turnovers. Patrick Mahomes does not take a lot of sacks. It's just a bad matchup for Buffalo. I'm not saying to drop the Bills if you have them, because they do have some good matchups coming up, but find another option this week against Kansas City.
It's funny you say that. That's you're going to get into that now with streaming and bye weeks and things of that nature. Don't let Buffalo go. Now you might have to look on your roster and decide if you're going to keep that 6th running back or that 5th wide receiver or that 2nd tight end or quarterback, even, rather than lose somebody for 1 week, because somebody's going to go out there and see that team and do exactly what you thought you couldn't do and pick them up and hang on to them for a week, knowing the matchups they have. And that's a big part of, starts and sits and waivers and dropping people is, with your waiver claims, your fab budget, your ads. Sometimes, you have to look ahead and be willing to bite the bullet on a guy. It's a coin flip call, but you want to have one of those guys hanging around that is going to have a bad matchup 1 week, but he's good after that. It's not worth dropping a defense like Buffalo, because that they're going to be good for probably for the sake of maybe one game for the rest of the season.
All right, so we're done for today. We're going to go ahead and sign off. We do want to let you know that stay tuned to the podcast. Keep subscribe and set your reminders, set your alerts for when new podcasts drop. We are going to try to give you guys that trade targets podcast that we had talked about a little bit last week. We're going to attempt to do that this week. And, now that once the Monday night game is complete, we'll have 4 solid weeks of stats to look at and trends that we can sort of try to find. And we're going to try to help you out with not only some guys to look at to trade for, but guys that you can trade away, and some strategies on how to get trades completed, because just offering one guy for one guy a lot of times doesn't really get it done. Sometimes you need to throw some extra things in there, spice it up with, a draft pick, or if your league allows fab trading, you can add a little bit of fab in there or whatever. But we'll get into that in our trade podcast that we're going to try to get you this week.
No, exactly. I think this is really it. We're almost at I guess you call it the quarter pole. Okay, you have a 17th week now, but you are able to see how some of these offenses and defenses are panning out. And what we'll do with the next episode and touching on trades is to look at the value of players, not only for a week to week, but for the rest of the season, possibly lining up, a potential playoff matchup. Hey, look, if you're 4-0 right now, hats off to you. 3-1, you're obviously going to be one of the top teams in your league. You're probably doing that right now. You're starting to take stock at who you have, whether or not you have draft picks, or you're able to allocate fab budget in a trade and different things like that. But you're probably looking down the road to see what matchups are going to be potential league winning matchups when it comes to, weeks maybe 14, 15, 16, 17, if you're running the full season. We'll try to get you some of those players that are starting to perk up a little bit and are probably that player or two you might be away from to get you over the hump or just put you far out enough ahead that, again, you might be able to light the cigar a little bit earlier than some other people.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Scott is at Scott from Delco on Twitter. I am at the 9 Route 1. We will talk to you next week.
Keep listening. We'll keep doing it. We love you out there, folks. Have a great week and good luck in fantasy. Peace.